studio. The only game they've released since then is this game, published by Warner Brothers instead of Disney, and it came out in June of 2017, just 5 months after the announcement that the studio was back. That suggests that this game was very, very rushed, maybe even being developed in less than 6 months, which explains why it's so similar to Cars 2. What's also interesting is that it basically released on every system it could, including the 360, the Wii U, and PS3, which is quite fascinating considering when it came out. As far as I know, all these versions are very similar, they're basically the same, and I played the PS4 version. So getting back on track, looking purely at the moment-to-moment gameplay compared to Cars 2, they've tightened up Cars 3 in the slight ways I think it needed. There were certain frames in 2 where you couldn't enter a drift or a boost, which made it feel a little off, and here they fixed that problem, which is great, though I still think that swapping between driving backwards and forwards is a little too slow. The weapons have been mixed up a bit too, though unfortunately I think that they're slightly worse than they were in Cars 2. There's a weapon called the Nullifier, which all it does is get rid of everyone's weapon. It's like they tried to make the most boring item they could. There's also one that steals boost from other cars, which sucks, but I think the worst contender is the simple boost item. I feel like the whole point of keeping the turbo system separate and skill-based was so that all the items could be weapons, but then they just undermined that by throwing in a boost item. Thankfully though, there are a lot more offensive weapons to counteract this. You very rarely get something bad, so it's not really a huge problem, but it wasn't a problem at all before. Another minor gripe I have is that the red shell equivalent, which by the way is a red rocket, and the green shell equivalent is a green rocket, because of course they are, is really quick. I actually liked the lock-on weapon in 2 because it gave you time to react to it when it was coming for you, and it made the weapons that you did have to aim much more useful in comparison. Still, all the weapons mostly feel more satisfying to use here than in Cars 2, so it's a bit of a trade-off. They've also added this mechanic where if you press a bumper while driving past certain items, usually explosive barrels, then you can tow that item behind you to protect yourself from incoming weapons, or press the fire button to fling it out in front of you as a projectile. This is a weird, somewhat inconsequential addition, but I guess it adds some high-level depth. I didn't find myself using it too much because you have to get pretty close to the things you pick up, and I don't want to go near those red barrels, but in multiplayer it can give you that bit of an edge. One adjustment that certainly is a downgrade is now you can fire weapons in the opposite direction by just leaning the left stick forwards or backwards like in Mario Kart. This wouldn't be a problem, but the whole driving backwards thing, which inverts your steering, is still in the game, which is a much more skillful way of doing this, and of course it used to be the only way of doing this in Cars 2. If you have the option to either spin around, shoot backwards, and then spin back again, or just pull the stick down and shoot, then obviously you're going to choose the easier option, which undermines what was so skillful and clever about the driving backwards thing. Driving backwards still serves a purpose though, because it still gives you boost just like any other stunt does. Cleverly they've added these long strips along the ground where if you drift, two-wheel, or drive backwards along them, depending on which one it is, then you're rewarded with lots of boost, and even more boost if you clear the whole thing from start to finish. This I think is one of the best adjustments to the gameplay because it helps mask the downtime that the ultra-wide tracks naturally incur. Track design is generally improved here, but these are still not top-tier kart racer tracks. They've gone a lot harder on providing multiple parts in a kind of watered-down MotorStorm sort of way, which is really good, and there are much more physics elements and dynamic moving parts in each level too, which I appreciate. They've done a good job recreating a lot of the locations from the film too, from the beach lightning trains on with Cruise, to the Muddy Destruction Derby spot, to Radiator Springs, to the Florida International Speedway. It's all here, and it's all really cool to see. They've thrown in some less interesting locations too, on farms and in the outback, and even included 5 maps from Cars 2, which I'd say is double dipping because it obviously is double dipping like pretty hard, but they've made up for it with more than enough original tracks, and you unlock the Cars 2 tracks right at the very end, so they kind of just feel like a bonus. It also helps that they picked the best of the best from Cars 2, like that one Italy track. Unfortunately, all these tracks still suffer from the everything being too wide and forgiving problem that's been with this series since the start, but it's a kid's game, the stunt strip things along the ground alleviate this, and the game is surprisingly challenging. Every time you select an event in the campaign, it asks you what difficulty you want to play on, and at first I figured like this is a kid's game, so I'm gonna play it on hard, it's not gonna be too bad, but I got absolutely demolished by the flawless AI, so I played out the rest of the game on medium, which provided a surprisingly decent challenge, something that Cars 2 couldn't actually do. Taking place after the movie, Chick Hicks is running a bit of a racing scene talk show, and Lightning is planning to continue his career despite him getting all old and obsolete, and the setup basically is that Lightning is training to challenge Jackson Storm to another race. The cutscenes mostly take place in this room with Chick presenting on his show, and while the writing is fine and has some neat gags, they haven't even got the usual replacement voice voice cast back for this, and it's noticeably worse. I miss Keith Ferguson, let alone Owen Wilson. Even more crazy is I think this is the only piece of Cars media where Larry the Cable Guy has been replaced as Mater, and it's hard to replace him. Like he's the guy that was happy to do the TV show and the voices for the rides at Disneyland and all the other video games, but he's not in this game for some reason. Like, we've come a long way since that first game managed to get the entire cast of the movie back.
Nothing shows off a racer's skills better than showing off after an amazing jump.
Hey, you're reading my cue cards.
Nothing shows off a racer's skills better than showing off...
And you already said that. I'll be in my dressing room.
The way you progress through the game is by completing these skill checks, which you can sort of think of like achievements. They range from completing certain cup series and winning events on certain tracks to performing a certain amount of flips in one jump or driving backwards for a certain amount of time. By completing these, you fill up this bar at the top, which will unlock you tracks and cars, and when you hit each of these icons, you unlock a story mission, which gives you a glimpse at how little story there is in this game. These story missions are fun enough, I just wish there were more of them, and I wish they did a bit more with them. They just feel like regular events with some short cutscenes attached and a bit of a twist on the objective. It's not super entertaining stuff. It's nothing like back in the old days when you did that highway racing or anything like that, but it's still neat, and it's a lot better than Cars 2. The regular events are broken up into 5 main modes. Carried over from Cars 2, there's the regular race mode without items, the Mario Kart style battle race with items, and the takedown mode where you just keep shooting at endlessly respawning cars until you pass a threshold. This mode has been improved upon in some nice ways, as they've added waves which spices it up a bit, and sometimes there are golden cars that you need to hit within a time limit for a huge score. There's also a couple of new modes, one being the Stunt Showcase, where you have to score the most points by doing flips in the air, and there's jumps everywhere and balloons which give you extra points. It's a simple fun mode which is surprisingly engaging. Finally, there's the time trial mode, which is what you'd expect. You race against your own best time ghost, but I enjoyed this more than I thought I would because the target times were actually pretty hard to hit. You can do any mode as a single event, or there are multiple Mario Kart style cups for each one. They're all pretty solid, but I think what's most notable here is the ones that they've left out. Thank God that boring battle mode is gone here. I'm still having nightmares about its London map, and that purple canister boss battle mode wasn't particularly fun either. In this game, 2 of the more boring modes are the regular races and the takedown mode, but in Cars 2 they were some of the better ones, which really puts things in perspective. I can't stress enough how much more likable this makes Cars 3. Like, there weren't really any events that I eye-rolled or dreaded when I had to play them, and really you mostly don't have to play any particular event thanks to the achievement-based progression system. The way the game is structured lets you unlock most things and get to the finale, while giving you a lot of choice in what events you want to play. Another thing that is a lot better than Cars 2. There's also a sandboxy game mode called Playground, where you're in a small open area and you can pull off stunts and find collectibles and play little challenges, one of which is a multiplayer battle with friends, which sort of replaces the battle mode from Cars 2. This whole mode feels like the most underbaked thing ever though. Like, it's buggy and the game is ultra quick to respawn you whenever you bump into things, and the challenges are really boring. It just feels like a custom-made Trackmania course or a really dodgy Unity proof of concept demo or something, though, you know, kids might find it amusing. The one thing interesting about it is that you can jump onto these green rails and do grinds, which actually feels pretty good to do. I really wish that they put these rails in the Stunt Showcase mode, because it would have added another layer of depth to that I think it kind of needed. Just like Cars 2, you can pick any car to play as, which is weird because it's meant to be about McQueen, and as expected, you unlock most of the characters from the movie. My personal favorite was this ambulance that continuously vocalized its sirens. Amazing. Generally, the game has a bit more character than Cars 2, not only because it has more than just one cutscene than before, but also because there's a lot more dialogue here than before. Cars have lines they'll say when they bump into specific characters, and they'll just generally say a lot more things, and races open and close with a good amount of dialogue too, but you know, you'll skip most of that anyway. There's just a bit more effort into making it feel more alive, which I quite appreciate. And just like before, every single thing is playable in split-screen multiplayer, and unsurprisingly, better in split-screen multiplayer. In fact, there are team-based events which are multiplayer only that have their own skill checks, so you can't technically 100% the game without a friend. They're just the normal events that you can play as a team or against each other, but it's nice that this mode encourages multiplayer because it really is the best way to play this game. If you have a couple of kids who are super into cars or playing Mario Kart together, racer, then this would be a solid pickup for them. Because Cars 3 Driven to Win is a pretty solid product. I think that its changes, even though they're all pretty minor, do add up to a confidently better experience than Cars 2, but it definitely doesn't blow Cars 2 out of the water. I mean, I can already picture arguments in the comments about which game is better, which I think says a lot. To me, this is more like a revised and refined version of Cars 2, and that game was pretty solid, so this game is also pretty solid. But unfortunately, I'm disappointed in most of the same ways. I actually watched Cars 3 for the first time before playing this game, and I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. It has a lot of heart, and it tells a good story, which is something that I can't say about the Cars 2 movie. I feel like it was easier to forgive the Cars 2 game for being so detached from the movie, because the movie just wasn't very good, but Cars 3 is actually a really good movie, which makes the game being fairly simple a bit too depressing. Like, the bar was set so high by that first game. It was such an ambitious movie game that really put you in Radiator Springs. To have the series start there and then end at an admittedly solid but somewhat rushed and relatively unambitious game is just that bit too underwhelming. Like, I know it's unrealistic, but imagine if this was a story-driven game. Maybe it's open world again, and it's set after Cars 3, where instead of playing as McQueen, you played as Cruz, developing her start as a racer. You could go through the early stages of her career and build it up and establish opponents, and McQueen could be your friend and your mentor. I feel like that'd be the perfect tie-in game for Cars 3. Or how about maybe it goes back in time and you play through Doc Hudson's career with all those characters, because that was expanded on so much in the movie. There's sort of a whole untapped world there that the game could really explore, but instead we got this. And that's fine, I guess. Like, considering how rushed this project was, they did a pretty good job. It's fine. It's entertaining. I'm just grumpy. This is a strong 6 to a light 7 sort of game. And with that, we conclude our review of Cars 3 Driven to Win. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Thanks especially to all my patrons, including everyone on the screen right now, and especially including Big Nuts 420, By Mini Me, Brazen Pregnancy Tests, Caden the Dingo, Dad.
Tonight's dinner, it's gonna be great.
If you thought the Cars games we've looked at so far are obscure, you're in for a treat. My quest continues to review every single Cars game ever, and this time we're taking a look at the 2 GBA games, the original movie tie-in and Maiden National Championship. I emulated them, so keep that in mind, but they seem to run perfectly fine. Let's get to it. I'm not sure if I've ever enjoyed an isometric racing game in my life. Like, if I had to pick a specific genre that produced the most underwhelming but not complete trash games, then I think isometric races would probably be my pick. Introducing Cars on the GBA, one of the most unreal game with large sprites and smooth scrolling graphics, but it's so zoomed in that it's legitimately impossible to react to anything coming up. I initially thought that this was going to be the hardest game ever because I couldn't really do anything about upcoming corners, and the arrows appearing on the screen were just useless, but then I learned I could toggle this map on in the middle of the screen with the trigger, and I spent the rest of my time with this game just staring at that instead of the road, which made it much easier. Still though, the steering is overly sensitive, and the fast pace just makes it so cornering involves crossing your fingers and trying not to oversteer. And it puts the occasional obstacle on the road like traffic or rocks, which most of the time you simply can't avoid without memorization, which can also be said about the occasional boost and slowing pads on the road. I didn't have a hard time once I got used to the feel of it, but it's the kind of game that I think would have been super hard as a kid because you really need to focus and it just steers really weird. Interestingly, they've tried to recreate a bit of the mission structure from the main game. I mean, there's no open world, but you can pick and choose and slowly unlock more events as the game goes on. It even has the Piston Cup races from the main game, and like the main game, they're very slightly mechanically different, except this time you build up a boost meter by slipstreaming cars, and then you press the right trigger to boost. They've also attempted a little bit of story with these short written dialogue screens before some events, and it vaguely follows the same story as the main game, where most of the dialogue is actually word for word taken straight from it. Weirdly though, there's only 16 events in the whole game. You can only play as Lightning with a few different color schemes. There's no multiplayer or extra modes. In fact, the only extra content is some unlockable stills from the movie, and the game is over in about an hour or so. It doesn't help that all the desert tracks look the same, all the Piston Cup tracks look the same, and there's no other track